Hello and welcome to another video. This piece was meant to be my family's Christmas card, so it needed to be festive enough that it fit the season, but I didn't want to go overboard with it. I've been enjoying doing car illustrations lately, so I asked my mom to pick a car that she liked, and she sent me a picture of a 1928 Packard. I found a few references, which I put on the side of my screen as I was sketching, but those are other people's images, so I'm not going to show them here. I've been experimenting with this way of sketching, starting out very loose and building specificity with each layer. It's been working pretty well for me, especially for these cars, which require a bit more structure and loyalty to the reference. I find that it's a lot less stressful to work this way. When I start out trying to do details right off the bat, it feels very complicated and overwhelming. By starting out with the overall basic shapes and building from there, it feels a lot more like a one step at a time approach. I've seen a lot of different sketching techniques, and I always admire people who can go in and sketch something that looks super clean right off the bat. I've never been good at working that way, and that's okay. Everyone works differently. Sometimes I feel discouraged that I can't sketch or paint the same way as someone else. But I have to remind myself that just like I can't do what that artist can, there are some people who can't do what I do. Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. As I sketched this, I tried to think about how I wanted to color the piece. Sometimes I go into a piece with very specific colors in mind, and even do a few color comps with just the sketch, so maybe I can modify the composition before adding colors. But in this case, the project was very fluid and changed a lot as I worked. I had originally thought I wanted to do a piece very similar to another piece I had done, which had a very painterly look, no line work. If you look on my Instagram for the 1931 Ford Model A that I did, that's what I had in mind for this one too. With that one, I had the luxury of working with my own reference pictures. I had seen the car in person. I could see the details a lot better, but this one was tougher. When I tried to zoom in on even the best references I could find, I still couldn't see things like how the windows joined to the main structure or how the mirrors were mounted, things like that. I had also finished a piece that had a very retro graphic design look and had very bold line work. Those factors combined led me to approach this car illustration a little differently compared to the others I had done, and get a little bit more playful and stylized with it, while still maintaining the integrity of the original car, and not straying too far away from it. You can see here that I'm inking on top of blue lines, which is a very common way to approach line work. Comic book artists that like to ink traditionally will sometimes even print out their scanned sketches that they've turned to blue line digitally. When done properly, they can scan the page back in and not worry about the blue too much, as the scanner won't pick up a certain range of blue called non-photo blue. Here though, it just made it easier for me to distinguish between my sketch and the final ink work. You may also be wondering why I'm choosing to do the line work in Photoshop rather than Illustrator. The answer is that I'm just a lot more comfortable with Photoshop. I can get more characteristic lines in there. Whenever I take line work to Illustrator, everything just falls really flat and loses all the life that the sketch had. By staying in Photoshop, I get all the freedoms that digital has to offer, as well as many of the hand-done qualities that traditional ink would bring. It's not perfect, and I'll be the first to admit that I still need to and want to practice my line work skills, but I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. For this piece, I did the ink work with just a plain solid round brush, nothing fancy, just the standard one from Photoshop. I did have the shape dynamics setting turned on so that it was bigger or smaller depending on how hard I was pushing, but that's about it. In some of my older pieces, I've had fun with textured ink brushes, and those are great if you're looking for a very specific style, but that just wasn't right for this piece. I knew it was going to be printed fairly small, and a nice clean line would read better for that. I also knew I wanted to keep the line work similar to the piece I had just finished, since I liked how that line work came out. Now, the coloring process here is pretty straightforward. I was not only looking at reference images that helped me narrow down my color options, but because I was working with line work, it was pretty much just like coloring my own coloring page. I still worked on separate layers in case I wanted to go back in later and add textures or shading to specific individual colors or parts. By breaking them up, it just ensures a bit more freedom later on down the line. You can always merge layers if the file gets too big or messy for you, but separating things out later sometimes costs you a lot more time and doesn't always work the way you want it to. So for the background, I had to play around with a couple ideas. I knew I didn't want to have a fully colored background. I knew it needed to be either framed in white or fade to white so that when my mom printed it out on her own printer, which doesn't have borderless printing, there wouldn't be a visible border around the image. I started with a central green element and ultimately settled on more of a minimal scene of a background. I tried to keep the trees pretty simple, again thinking of that Model A drawing I had done with the cityscape in the background. I didn't want to pull any attention away from the car, I just wanted to help make the car pop. I'm pretty happy with how this came out. I think it looks like a very elegant cartoon car, and definitely definitely reads as very seasonal. By pushing that green down to a subtle light blue, I think it really helped sell the idea that it's cold and snowy out there. And that just about does it for this piece. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up and maybe even a comment. I love reading those. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button, and if you want to make sure you don't miss any of my work, follow me on Instagram where I post slightly more often with things that I don't always record. Thanks again, and I hope you have a very lovely day.